Aloha and good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, February 8th, 2024, and it is 9:03 a.m. Will the Planning and the Economy Committee meeting please come to order? I would like to welcome Council Members Say and Okimoto. I understand Vice Chair Cordero and Councilmember Wire will be coming in shortly. Pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statute, Section 92.3.7, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony in person in the council chamber or remotely on all items on the agenda when each item is taken up. All persons who register to testify in person will be called upon first, followed by those who register to testify remotely. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to testify following the registered testifiers. For those standing by remotely, please utilize the Zoom raise hand feature to indicate your desire to speak. For those joining us by telephone only, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. Before testifying, each person shall state their full name, and it will be limited to a 1-minute presentation on each item. HRS Section 92.3.7 requires all votes at a remote meeting to be conducted by roll call unless unanimous. Therefore, I will first call for objections, and if there are any, I will call for a roll call vote. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones for the duration of this meeting. Moving to agenda item number 1, Resolution 24-28, accepting a gift to the City of Travel, Lodging, and Meals valued at $1,450 from the International Economic Development Council for the Office of Economic Revitalization's Innovation and Technology Program Manager to attend the Economic Recovery Corps kickoff training event in Portland, Oregon from February 11th to the 13th, 2024. Here for the administration, we have Amy Asselby, Executive Director for the Office of Economic Revitalization.
Good morning, Chair, Council members. I welcome any questions you may have on this gift.
Members, do we have any questions? Thank you, Director. We will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name. Seeing none, we will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. The chair recommends that Resolution 24-28 be reported out for adoption. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. Moving to agenda item number 2 for action, Resolution 23-305, confirming the appointment of Elena Bryant from Kaneohe to serve on the Planning Commission for a term to expire on June 30th, 2024. Members, as I mentioned during last month's full council hearing, the council passed Resolution 21-156 on April 13th, 2022, which amended the city charter to require specific experience or expertise to 4 of the 9 seats on the Planning Commission, including land use, land development and construction, Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices or law, and climate change and/or environmental protection. As current members' terms expire, the seats have to be filled with someone who meets the criteria. The last 2 seats were filled by members with land use and land development expertise. Ms. Bryant fulfills the requirement for someone with substantial experience or expertise in Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices, Native Hawaiian law, or traditional Hawaiian land usage. She is a native of the Ko'olaus and grew up in both Ko'olaupoko and Ko'olauloa. Mahalo, Ms. Bryant, for agreeing to serve on the Planning Commission. Given your substantial experience and expertise in Native Hawaiian law and traditional and customary practices, I am excited for you to join the commission. If you would please explain why you desire to serve on the commission, that would be greatly appreciated. I believe we have Ms. Bryant remotely. Aloha and good morning.
Aloha, good morning, Councilmember Kia'aina, members of the committee. I apologize that I'm unable to be there in person today. I had a work conflict. But I just want to start by thanking the committee for considering my nomination, and also to thank the mayor and his team for putting their faith in me. I'm honored and humbled to be the voice of, having the perspective of a Native Hawaiian law practitioner, environmental law practitioner, and being able to share that perspective with the Planning Commission. Serving on the Planning Commission is a heavy kuleana, especially today in light of all of the issues facing our island home, but it's one that I look forward to carrying in order to add to the diversity and expertise of the Planning Commission. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have for me.
Members, do any of you have any questions for Ms. Bryant? Seeing that there are no questions, thank you so much for being with us today. We will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name. Seeing none, we will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. Seeing that there is no further discussion, the chair recommends that Resolution 23-305 be reported out for adoption. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. We will see you at full council, Ms. Bryant. Take care. Welcome, Councilmember Wire. We're moving on to agenda item number 3 for action, Resolution 23-307, confirming the reappointment of Jeffrey Hong to serve on the Liquor Commission for a term to expire on December 31st, 2028. Mahalo, Mr. Hong, for your service and willingness to continue to serve. You have been super engaged and shown great leadership in supporting the staff, helping to find other commissioners, and overall support for policies that are rebuilding trust at the Liquor Commission. If you would please explain your experience while serving on the commission and why you desire to continue to serve. Mr. Hong is also joining us remotely from Australia.
Aloha, Chair Kia'aina and members of the commission. My name's Jeff Hong. Mahalo for the consideration for a full term of service on the Liquor Commission. I've just completed my first year. Certainly, this has been a very active year. With myself, we've also added 3 other commissioners, so almost an entire rotation of the commissioners themselves. And I want to thank both the administration and the council for quickly working on these appointments. We were working at a minimum quorum of 3 commissioners for quite some time, and it was very difficult to conduct meetings with only minimum quorum. But the dedicated service of my fellow commissioners and of the agency itself was what made it very possible to kind of continue the important work of the Liquor Commission itself. We are, as a body, working to understand and streamline the licensing process currently. Some of the items that, when I came to you originally, I said, as we want to make sure that we're measuring some of the performance aspects, and so on our website now we're publishing how long it takes to get a license at this time. And unfortunately, it is a long time. So we're looking at ways to streamline that process. We've supported the hiring of Administrator Patilos. He is doing an awesome job of helping us get the department back in order from both a policy and a personnel standpoint. He's been a joy to work with. As we also go through and work to implement the recommendation of Wei Chen's report, I know there is a lot of desire to make sure that we implement the items there and the deficiencies that are in the department. And we are taking our best efforts to go through that as we build up both on the commissioner side and within the staff itself. One of the things I would like to highlight is a bill, HB 1859. It provides us exemption to the Sunshine Law for training of commissioners and commissions, which would be really helpful. So right now we're trying to conduct training on the process and on the process of getting licenses and the processes within the commission itself. And we hold those in open session, which I think is good for the public to see and to have this kind of transparency. On the other hand, it does have a high overhead of having an open hearing in order to conduct training of my fellow commissioners. I think that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify and to serve in this capacity. I'm here for your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hong. Members, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Hong? And welcome, Vice Chair Cordero. You're lucky, Mr. Hong. You gave such a great presentation that there are no questions. Okay,
all right.
So we will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name. Seeing none, we will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. If there is no further discussion, the chair recommends that Resolution 23-307 be reported out for adoption. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. We'll see you at full council, Mr. Hong.
All right, mahalo. Bye.
Moving on to agenda item number 4 for action, Bill 64, 2023 FD1, addressing the regulation of uses through Chapter 21, Revised Ordinances of Honolulu 2021, the Land Use Ordinance. Bill 64 addresses the regulation of land uses throughout Chapter 21, Revised Ordinances of Honolulu. Members, I just wanted to briefly go over again my plans for Bill 64. As you know, the bill is lengthy and complex due to the significance of the changes that Bill 64 will result in with regard to where uses will and will not be permitted and under what circumstances uses may occur. I want to ensure that the council members and members of the public have sufficient time to review and provide comments on each use. Accordingly, at each Planning and the Economy hearing, I will be prioritizing proposed amendments by use type. We are considering residential uses today, followed by public, civic, and institutional uses and agricultural uses. We have already completed industrial and commercial uses. This will allow us to have robust and focused discussions on each use, and members of the public will be able to more easily track the amendments made at each committee meeting. Just a note, the uses are color-coded in the master use table. Residential uses are orange and yellow. Each use has use categories. For residential, that includes household living, group living, and accessory residential. And each use category has land uses. For example, household living, that includes single unit dwelling, small group living, accessory dwelling unit. As was done for this meeting, roughly 2 weeks before Bill 64 is considered, at a committee meeting, I will issue a memo to members about the scope of Bill 64 that will be prioritized at the upcoming meeting and instructions for proposed amendments. As I mentioned and as detailed in the agenda, today's hearing will be prioritizing amendments relating to residential uses. We have listed on the agenda 4 council communications related to amendments to the FD1 version of Bill 64 that was approved on December 6, 2023, relating to residential uses. We have Council Communication 10, 2024, proposed by Councilmember Dos Santos Tam. I am proposing accepting 2 of his recommendations, and I have included them in my updated proposed amendments found in Council Communication 19, 2024. My substantive proposed amendments for this meeting mainly address group living, multi-unit dwellings in the B1 and B2 zoning districts, accessory dwelling units, and ohana uses. I think that the home occupation accessory use will have substantive amendments as well. However, I thought it best for us to discuss that use today to give members and the public more time to think about amendments, which I will entertain at next month's Planning and the Economy meeting on March 7th. Therefore, I am holding off on substantively responding to Councilmember Dos Santos Tam's recommendations related to the home occupation use until the next meeting. I will go over these in more detail when we get to discussion, if that's okay with everyone. Members, I would like to take testimony before we bring up the administration. We will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, yes, we do.
When I call your name, please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name for the record. The first speaker, oh, these are remote testifiers. Is Mr. Ted Kafalas here with the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii?
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Ted Kafalas with Grassroot Institute. This is a good bill for the most part, but it could be better. We do support the amendments offered by Chair Kia Aina and Councilmember Dos Santos Tam, which deletes all the language requiring a minimum number of square footage for commercial uses. Right now, it's requiring 20%, and we think that should just be one non-residential use. That 20% is just an arbitrary and rigid number. But having just one non-residential use guarantees mixed use without kind of dictating a percent. Also want to point out that directly above that on page 19, we would encourage the committee to delete the language for multi-unit dwellings are permitted within the primary urban center development plan and EVA development plan areas. Most parcels zoned B1 or B2 are already inside the primary urban center and the EVA development area, but there are some parcels that are located in Kapolei, Mililani, Waiwa, Kaneohe, and so the city shouldn't be preventing mixed-use development in these areas. When it comes to ADUs, we do agree with Chair Kia Aina's proposed amendment that would remove parking minimums for ADUs in the EVA development plan. Parking minimums can add up to $20,000 to the cost of a building of an ADU, so anytime we can remove that, it's a good thing. And then just quickly, one thing that I hope you will consider is reinstating this section that will allow someone to get a permit for an ADU that they've built without one previously. We want these structures to be permitted. We want to know what's out there. So we do think that we should include this section, and by deleting it, it just further incentivizes these structures to remain unpermitted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, does anyone have any questions? Vice Chair Cordero.
Mr. Kafalas, first question, can you repeat again relating to the addition of the EVA development plan? And then also, if you could please repeat your last statement as opposed to, to maybe allow for permits for ADUs that were already not awarded, but granted permits.
Sure. No, I appreciate that, Vice Chair. So on page 19, there's language that says in B1 and B2 zoning districts, multi-unit dwellings are permitted within the primary urban center development plan and the EVA development plan areas. We're proposing to remove that language where it says starting at multi-unit dwellings are permitted within the primary urban center development plan and EVA development plan. Again, most parcels are already zoned in those areas. But there are some parcels in other areas, and we don't want to restrict those necessarily. When it comes to the unpermitted language, in the original Bill 64, there was language that essentially said the owner of a structure constructed without a building permit before September 14th, 2015, who wants to convert that structure to an accessory dwelling unit shall obtain an after-the-fact building permit. In addition to fulfilling the base requirements of the after-the-fact permit, any adjustments to the structure must conform with this section and any additional adopted policies and rules.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Members, are there any other questions? Thank you. The next testifier is Tracy Tanaki from DR Horton, Hawaii.
Good morning, Chair Kiaina and members of the committee. Thank you for the time to provide and share testimony today. My name is Tracy Tanaki. I'm with DR Horton, Hawaii. We are building the master plan community Ho'opili out on the west side. I did submit some written testimony and be happy to answer any questions or detailed questions to that. But just a little bit of background, we've been reviewing Bill 64 in its former life, Bill 10, for several years now with all of you, and we do absolutely support the adoption of amendments today. You know, it needs to be contemporized. It served its purpose back in the day, but things have changed in how we build the urban built environment, and I think it has some great qualities in it. The one that I'd like to focus on today is just providing you a little bit more data and background on allowing multifamily dwellings in B1 and B2. And I know some of the concerns or questions that were raised to us was really how do we set minimum standards to be able to maintain a commercial aspect in B1 and B2. So what I've provided you is a case study of a table data of 5 mixed-use projects that we've actually built in Ho'opili since 2020. So they are mixed-use residential as well as commercial and live work. And we went through recently and collected data on the number of commercial units that are actually in use today. And what we found across the 5 projects is that most of them are quite underutilized right now. So absorption is low. We've learned a lot about the commercial market. It ebbs and flows and it's quite volatile at times. But really our commercial absorption, meaning how much of the square footage is actually that was built, that is actually being utilized today for commercial space is about 23% or a quarter of the space. So within those 5 projects, we've built out a little over 87,000 square feet of commercial space, and we still have about 67,000 currently vacant today. So we're gonna have to work through that. It's, some of those spaces are several years old, but the average right now per project is about 4,000 square feet that can be absorbed. So I thought I'd share this information with you just so that you can have further discussions and evaluations on really how to set a minimum that would encourage housing, more housing opportunities, and not eliminate or preclude B1 and B2 from adding potentially, as our case study shows, another 577 units where they currently can't be built today. Thank you very much. Oh, perfect timing.
Thank you so much. Mahalo for the detailed information you have provided regarding historical absorption of your Ho'opili mixed-use projects, as well as comments by Mutual Housing. Although you shared challenges with filling your commercial spaces, I understand that you support the FD1, which require 10,000 square feet of non-residential for parcels between 4 and 7 acres, and 40,000 square feet for parcels over 7 feet. Is that correct? 7 acres.
Yes, that was our original support, and we've always been supportive of that. We started supporting that 2 years ago, and today, the data is showing something a little bit different. I'd encourage you to review the data, answer any questions I have. I would encourage maybe a lower if it's possible, but I understand there's a balance between, you know, the intent of B1 and B2 and residential. I will say that in talking with Mutual Housing, who's our affordable rental development partner, they would not likely entertain the opportunity to build rental housing for 68% AMI and below on B1 and B2 if it had a commercial requirement. And, you know, based on our data, we would take a closer look in our diligence if we're looking at B1 and B2 to make sure that if it is 10,000 or 40,000, that, you know, we be able to absorb it in that specific area. Right now, it doesn't show it in Ho'opili.
Thank you. My second question is, do you have any thoughts on BIA's recommendation requiring a market study be performed prior to approval of projects that include multi-use dwellings in the B1 and B2 districts?
No, I apologize. I didn't review BIA's testimony. But a market study, you know, wherever a developer or builder is looking to potentially acquire a piece of B1 and B2, we would always do our diligence and a study of the market to see what the potential absorption is of the commercial space relative to the benefits of being able to build residential. And for individual standalone projects, you know, there's an underwriting that goes with that risk. And that would definitely need to be evaluated and studied.
Thank you. Are there any other members who has any questions for the testifier?
I just have a couple.
Councilmember Say.
Yeah, Tracy, how do you address the issue in regards to, you know, BMX mixed use with residential with the Department of Taxation or Budget and Fiscal Services? How would I formulate a new category?
It's a very good question, Councilmember. Thank you for asking. So we have had several discussions over the years with the tax department because as I understand, tax categories are kind of retail, right? Commercial or residential. They don't really have a blended tax rate. And so a good example of some of the obstacles that we faced as well as our homeowners when they purchased live-work units, which is a type of townhouse unit where you operate a business on the ground floor and live upstairs. When we first sold them and people started moving in, they were taxed at the commercial tax rate, but not for just the ground floor commercial. They took the whole square footage of the unit and taxed them at a commercial rate, which is 5 times higher than a residential rate. So our homeowners came back to us and were inquiring, and so we were advocating for them and had really good discussions at the tax office about how that came about in the system that they have. We were told that they don't have a mixed tax rate and they aren't able to split the square footage of the unit because it's 1 TMK to be able to tax at 2 different rates. So I would love to have more discussions about a mixed tax rate, if that is possible, or ability for the tax office to be able to tax 1 TMK at 2 different rates, especially if you're doing entertaining more home occupations and things like that.
Madam Chair, the reason why I pose this question is that it seems like for a lot of us in primary urban district, the primary urban center, District 5, there is a lot of mixed use already in place, both residential and commercial. The key for me was always the fact that, Tracy, if your particular project out in Ho'opili would address it with family-owned businesses, that would be much more easier because with the vacancies that you have today, you're right, people are not living upstairs or next to it, et cetera.
Well, the vacancies that I refer in my report are actually most of it is purely commercial space that we built out.
Wow.
Some of it is the live-work space, and yes. I calculated the commercial portion of the live-work units. Of the live-work units are very popular. I think they provide a lot of opportunities, especially through COVID. A lot of people have moved their businesses home to their live-work unit. But most of them are used for purely residential right now. But they have the opportunity to change them over time, and we're seeing that grow in Ho'opili.
And one final thought, which we had the discussion the other day, was the fact that when we have these type of mixed use, business and commercial, would it be possible that the area gets a brownie point in the area of maybe government services? Because you are expanding the population base or increasing the population base, there is much more stress on the present services that we have. And that's where I was trying to be very selfish in looking at District 5, which is the primary urban center, that as the increase in the number of residential units, we should be able to get more and more of the services that need to be provided in that district. You know what I'm trying to get at. It's just that the more density, the more incidents or services are needed. And you can't have it status quo, present 2024. I'm looking at it from a point of view, 5,000 more units in primary urban center, District 5, maybe a model where we could use to say more money should be set aside for that particular district. I don't know. And then finally, what you guys do have a PI? Do they have a PIM for Kapolei, Ho'opili?
I'm sorry, what's a BIM?
Public infrastructure map. So county services, if you want a fire station, if you want, da-da-da-da-da. All I'm trying to get at, as you folks grow, the demand will be greater for these type of services. So do you folks, as a community benefit, donate the property to the county for these particular services that may be provided in the future?
Yes, may I? Yes, at Ho'opili, obviously, through our entitlement process, we made a commitment to provide all of the utilities and infrastructure for Ho'opili. We also have a 2-acre land dedication to the fire department, so we've been working with them. We have a location for them, and so hopefully we'll continue those discussions so that we can get that deeded over to them and they can build a fire station in Ho'opili.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, yes, we do. I believe it's Angela Young.
Good morning, Ms. Young.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee. Angela Melody Young, testifying in strong support. So Bill 64 amends the land use ordinance, and this chapter may also be referred to as the zoning ordinance, and may, to the extent practicable, contain other ordinances regulating the utilization of land pursuant to Charter Chapter 1504. It is the intention of the Council that the LUO provides reasonable development and design standards for the location, height, bulk, and size of structures, yard areas, parking facilities, and open spaces, and the use of structures and land for agriculture, industry, businesses, residences, and a few other purposes. These statutory provisions the Council is going over will minimize adverse effects resulting from inappropriate location use or design of sites and structures. So what's good about this is that there is some equity provided here in certain things that the Council is going over. For example, temporary uses, which is not heavily regulated. Uses and structures of a temporary nature shall not be governed by this chapter unless the director determines that significant.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Young. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Okay.
Clerks, is there anyone else standing by remotely to testify?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. And since we have a lot of items to discuss today, so we are going to move on to have the administration come up here. Elizabeth Kruger, Chief Planning, Department of Planning and Permitting.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. I'm Elizabeth Krieger, the Chief Planner of the Land Use Permits Division for the Department of Planning and Permitting. And we're available for any questions and look forward to this discussion today.
Members, if it's okay, before I entertain questions by members, I would like to first focus our discussion and questions of DPP by subject and then open it up to any other questions. So first, let's start with group living. With respect to the group living category, the current LUO has one group living use and a separate special needs housing for the elderly use, even though arguably special needs housing for the elderly falls within the definition of group living. I am proposing to create 3 group living uses. 1 small group living use for activities, facilities that are regulated by the state. 1 small group living use for activities, facilities that are not regulated by the state. And 1 large group living use. The special needs housing for the elderly uses will fall within one of those 3 uses, and the land use flexibilities allowed under the current LUO will be allowed with a conditional use permit under the large group living use. You may know that state law, specifically HRS 46-4D, provides that no county ordinance shall prohibit group living in facilities with 8 or fewer residents for purposes of functions that are licensed, certified, registered, or monitored by the state of Hawaii. This is why there are group living facilities in all of our residential districts and do not need conditional use permits, because state law says that we cannot prohibit these small group living uses if the state is regulating them. For clarity, and consistent with HRS 46-4D, I am proposing the 3 use categories. The small group living uses will be for uses that have 8 or fewer residents. 1 use will be for those that are regulated by the state, and they will be allowed by right without conditions. Not all group living facilities are regulated by the state, so there will be a second small group living use, and that use will require a conditional use permit. The large group living use for facilities with 9 or more residents who do not meet the definition of a family will have to comply with standards and will also require a conditional use permit. Members, do you have any questions on this? Councilmember See.
Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd rather have it all be deferred to the state. When we have a problem about group living in a community, everybody points finger at each other. So give it to the state, point the finger at the state, and we're out of it. Because they're doing it right now with the present law.
DPP, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, we kind of do that when it comes to these small group living facilities that are licensed by the state. The state in their licensing process requires those applicants to get a zoning clearance from the city. We issue that zoning clearance, but we don't require any conditions or anything like that. They're allowed by right. And so when there are complaints about the operations of those facilities, the state, as the licensor of those facilities, is usually the one to respond to those types of complaints.
But Liz, why do we have to be under the authority of this? I'm just questioning the state. We're talking about zoning, a residential area. Then you have, nobody comes before the neighborhood board saying, we want to have a group living. A lot of them don't, they just do it. And that's when we get the implications about what's going on, Mr. Say. Is this in compliance with the zoning all we have in our district or our community? And that's a big issue. I'm not against group living. It's just a question of, I don't believe the city should regulate it right now and leave it to the state. And if there's any jurisdictional issues, problems, just go to Department of Health, Department of Human Services, who are the licensure.
Yes, we do require, what Chair Kia Aina referenced in HRS is for 8 or fewer occupants within the group living facility. So we require major conditional use permits for any facility that requires 9 or that is going to have 9 or more care recipients, even if it's licensed by the state. So in those situations, the city does have a land use permit associated, but for those that are 8 or fewer, we don't have the land use permit associated, and we do then defer to the state in terms of the operation of those facilities.
Just follow one final question. I don't want to belabor the issue. So a group living could be considered by our local residents as short-term rentals. And who enforces short-term rentals? My point is that everything is going to be dumped on the city for the enforcement side also. That's what I'm saying. So to have this split between state and county, state, you're in charge. Go to the neighborhood board, it's the state representative, the state senator, da-da-da-da-da. Clear it. This way, it's just muddled. And I'm not against, just that feeling the pressure of District 5. I'd rather take the high road and support a lot of the projects that you see where I get criticized, not listening to the residents, not listening to the board, but I'm looking at the greater good for the community. That's the concern I have today, and that's where, it's not fair for my colleagues across, not my colleagues, the state, to just dump everything upon the city and county of Honolulu. So I hope this plea can be heard across the street. Because, hey, we are, as far as District 5, the primary urban center, being just bombarded with more and more development as far as what our predecessors had designated, which I do support. Don't get me wrong, but at some point in time, enough is enough, unless I'm asking the developers and like other departments, you increase the services for the increase of density that occurs. Because that's where you're gonna get more and more criminal incidents, da-da-da-da-da. So I'm looking not just 5, 10 years, this is 20 years down the road. So I'm sorry, I'm just on my
Thank you,
soapbox.
Councilmember. And
you.
if you have any recommendations, we are going to be continuing consideration of residential uses into the next hearing. So if you have any specific amendments, you can have your staff work on that. We're going to move on to group living in agricultural districts. Councilmember Cordero, Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Ms. Kruger. Thank you very much for being here. So, of course, this is relating to group living in residential use, and I had the chance to meet with a lot of my care home operators in my district just last night. So, of course, this is fresh in my. So, you sharing about how they have to go to DPP for zoning before they apply to the state's Office of Healthcare Assurance was fresh in my mind as well. But my question is relating to, we're used to getting the state land use bill and having to update it every single time. When we do have the new types of group living distinctions at this city, as opposed to how they distinguish it at the state side, versus type 1, type 2, and they had their types of residential care homes distinctions. Is there a difference that DPP sees when operators come to the city for their zoning and then go to the state? Because the main question that a lot of the care home operators, and I really couldn't answer this, was first off, a lot of them don't have the ability to keep up with what we're doing and all the different terms and the different regulations and rules that, regulations and terms that we have. Are we looking to, make it uniform with what they also have to apply for at the state with this land use bill as well? Land use. Yeah.
The short answer is no. We're not looking to make it consistent with the state. The state has the license for 5 or fewer care recipients and then 6 or more care recipients, but that 6 or more goes beyond 8. And because, I assume that because of HRS 46, the section that had been previously mentioned, requires us to allow them to go up to 8 under the definition of under the current definition of family. 8 or fewer care recipients are allowed in a dwelling unit. So when we do get those zoning clearance requests from the care home operators, they specify how many care recipients they're going to have, and then we base our response on that. So if they send us a request saying that they have 9 care recipients, we say you need a conditional use permit for that. If they say it's 8 or fewer, we say that's allowed under the definition of family.
Awesome, and thank you. And this either maybe for you or our committee chair, but with the change from occupancy of to type of, is it because of the different types of residential care, how some are just during the day as opposed to living there full-time?
Under the original Bill 10, what we had proposed and what we had worked on with our consultant was taking this sort of small group home out of the definition of family. It was kind of a clunky location to just be like, well, a family is people, related by blood marriage or adoption, but it could also be this care home situation. So what our consultant had said was that other communities had a lot of had a good experience classifying it as a small group home and then giving it the same classifications wherever those dwelling units are allowed. So we had proposed to have group living small and large, and then Chair Kia Aina's current proposal is to split out those 2 small ones, because when they're not licensed by the state, we require the conditional use permit for 6 or more care recipients.
Got it. So all in all, I know that with Chair Kia Aina mentioning that, with our current land use bill and the prescriptions that the county's looking to include in it is basically with the growth of what we see now in the city, right? So that means also the growth in the changes in the types of care or group living facilities as well. So is that the main reason for the change from 6 to 8?
Functionally, it's not going to be different from the perspective of what requires a conditional use permit and that kind of thing. So functionally, it'll function the same way it does today, but it'll be much clearer in terms of the land use category, because then the definition of family will be people married or people related by blood marriage or adoption, or 5 unrelated people, and then the definition of what occurs in a group home is under the group living facility definition. So it just makes that distinction clearer, and we believe will be easier for people to understand.
Okay, got it. So I can go back to my neighbors from Maya to Kapalama and be like, hey, there's not too many changes. It's really distinguishing the definition of the operations of a group living between families. And okay, I just wanted to know how I can go back to them, because of course they're so used to dealing with the state side, and then when they come, now they're hearing that we're talking about residential, and just want to be able to bring that up. But thank you. I want to thank you as well as the committee chair for working on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. And mahalo, Liz. I just wanted to follow up to make sure I was following. So anyone that goes to license at the state is going to be told to come to DPP, and then based on how many residents they have, you'll tell them if they need a conditional use permit or not.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, can you walk through, and because I've had similar conversations, but I'm trying to understand when we're looking at the unlicensed care homes versus the general, is it 5-person related requirement generally? How do we arrive at that interplay in terms of just what are you looking at when you're looking at unlicensed ones versus licensed ones? Is it the same analysis as the larger ones when you're looking at conditional use permits, or is there different factors that you're considering?
No, there aren't different factors that we're considering when it comes to any group living facility that requires a cup. The reason that there's a distinction between 5 and fewer is because 5 unrelated people can live together in a dwelling unit, and that's just allowed. Once it got to 6, a conditional use permit was required as a group living facility, but then there's this weird gap between 6 people and 8 people that are licensed. So that's where that, and sometimes they're licensed. A lot of the time, the kind of group living facilities that aren't licensed are things like convents or monasteries or dormitories, or, you know, it's a group of people that are living in a lodging unit or in dwelling units. They have a reason to be living together, but they're not actually receiving care. They're not in a you know, they're not, the operator of the facility isn't necessarily regulated by the Office of Healthcare Assurance.
Oh.
So in those situations, you have 6 students living together, then it's a group living facility, requires a major conditional use permit. And so the small unlicensed group living facility category is just going to clearly show that it's 5 or fewer people living together.
Okay, no, that's extremely helpful. Thank you. Mahalo, Chair.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to group living in agricultural districts. In previous hearings, there were discussions about whether group living should be allowed in agricultural districts. As a result, the FD1 would not permit group living uses in the Ag 1 zoning district. I am proposing to also not allow large group living in the Ag 2 zoning district. For small group living facilities, I propose to reinsert a standard in the existing LUO that requires the activities taking place at the facilities to be agricultural in nature. If you agree, I would propose a verbal amendment to further modify the standards on page 5, row 15 of my amendments. Members, are there any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to get DPP's thoughts on that analysis and opinion.
Regarding group living in the Ag 2 district?
Yeah, correct.
We've discussed a lot of different times that people may want a large group living facility in an Ag area. I think that in Bill 64, there's also farm worker housing as a category in the agricultural section. And I think if that didn't exist, then we may want to have something that was along the lines of a group living facility. But in practice, we've had very, very few group living facilities proposed in the Ag 2 district, and they are supposed to have an agricultural plan and specify exactly how the residents are working on the farm or within the agricultural use. In practice, we have so few of them that I don't think it's going to have a very large impact, especially if farm worker housing is an option.
Okay, and just quickly, Chair, because I appreciate that, because I'm curious, like what, I know you said there's so few, but the circumstances outside of farm worker or cultural uses that there would be or could be contemplated, or if there's even a need.
The last one that I can ever remember hearing about was a proposed group living facility in which kids with autism would live at the facility, would receive care, and part of their care would be, say, working within the agricultural use. That one never got off the ground. It got its conditional use permit, but it never actually moved forward. And I was trying to think if I know of any others, but I really don't. The Hawaii State Hospital has, I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask Alex to come up here and discuss that real quick.
Hello, Chair and Council members. Alex Beatty. Hawaii State Hospital is on Ag 1. They have a PRU for the hospital use itself, but they then lease to a few private operators. So right now there's one group living facility that's operated privately. They have a CUP. They had to do an ag plan and incorporate ag uses into the recovery process. So there's another one that's proposed similarly at the same site. Other than that, though, I don't know of any other big ones
Okay.
like that.
And there's no problems with that being on Ag 1 because it's a public use, or if we're modifying?
That sliver might be, it's kind of an old project of mine, so I don't remember the exact details. It might be on Ag 2, and then the principal part of the hospital is Ag 1, and it's all part of the same property.
I see.
But they have a conditional use permit. They've modified it once or twice to do some minor expansions. It hasn't been a problem, or at least I haven't received any complaints about it. But the concern about allowing too many of these uses on ag land is a real one for the council to consider.
Okay, appreciate that. Mahalo. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? I'm going to move on now to special needs housing for the elderly. As I mentioned, special needs housing for the elderly, that would be those 60 years of age and older, is currently a separate use in the LUO and permits these facilities in the apartment mixed use and business mixed use zoning districts where the density, height, and off-street parking requirements of the underlying zoning district may be modified under a conditional use permit. I am proposing to add back that flexibility for the large group living use in the same zoning districts. An example of this type of housing is assisted living facilities with communal dining. DPP, do you have any comments? And I guess members, do you have any questions on that proposal?
We're supportive of that proposal to specify that special needs housing for the elderly is a particular type of group living facility that qualifies for those density and height bonuses within those certain zoning districts. It was a use that was created under a specific ordinance by the city council and was identified as being, it was, there were places where care was really almost hospital-like, so not quite to the level of a hospital, but not just standard care. So it was very much like a nursing home, and they were identified as uses that needed additional height and density to provide the level of care that was necessary.
Okay, member Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Kruger, we're just wondering, you said height and density as additional modifications. Are there any other types of modifications that have been sought by special needs housing for elderly?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but it specifies that parking can be modified. I would guess that they had also requested yard and potentially height setback amendments, especially for the BMX3 district. They would have had a street centerline height setback for a long time, and where they got the additional 25% height, they may have encroached into the height setback. But again, I'd have to look back at those facilities to see what had been approved.
Okay, understood. And so this specifically, there's no specific zoning where these types of housing are allowed. They're just allowed in general, mainly in AMX, BMX, residential, right?
They were only allowed in those areas. This particular special needs housing for the elderly within other districts, group living facilities were allowed, so they could still, a care home providing a certain level of medical care could locate in any of the districts where group living was allowed. But yeah, this special needs housing that provided these additional height and density allowances were targeted at the apartment and business mixed use districts.
Okay, so if I was someone who was operating such a facility, how can I distinguish if I'm one or the other?
That's a really good question too. I believe that well, first of all, under the definitions kind of clarify a little bit, and then an applicant in coming before us with these, with a major conditional use permit would have to show how they met the definition. I don't I don't think there's any like specific worksheet that's saying like what kind of equipment do your care providers use, or like what level of certification do your care providers have. But that all would go into our analysis of their proposal.
Okay, I'm just thinking because I know that, so of course we all have different types of facilities in all of our council districts, but then I'm thinking about like somewhere people just have their garages and then the homes, and then of course they have their dining rooms, but that would just be a group living facility versus here where somewhere in my former council district, like by Bishop Museum, they had like a whole facility for gathering, for events, for transportation, and for and it sounds more like this, for special needs housing for the elderly. So yeah, I guess really just depends, but how often do they have to apply for these distinctions or designation as these facilities?
Once they get a conditional use permit, so they all require a conditional use permit. Once they get that, that runs with the land, and then any modifications to either the use of the facility or the physical facility would have to be reviewed by the director and then determine whether a minor or major modification was warranted. So they're definitely they definitely have that land use permit that's regulating them. Many of them, if they're also regulated by the Office of Healthcare Assurance, would have to renew their whatever license that they have with the state at that whatever interval they require. And then I believe they also do pretty regular site visits and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And in relation to those, especially for this, I've seen not just at one neighborhood board, but maybe at least two of my neighborhood boards, at Kalipalama and then IAEA, relating to the conditional use permits for such facilities. And because it runs with the land use said, yeah, a lot of the residents probably don't even know about it until they post a permit. They go door to door saying, hey, we're going to reapply or X, Y, and Z, or expand somehow, and then they go to the neighborhood board, right? This is just a comment. It just feels very awkward because I feel a lot of the time that the city council or me is caught in the middle between all the residents, the neighborhood board, and then that person who has been allowed to operate their facility. So that's just a common experience that has been contentious in both sides of my district, both tail ends of my district. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, Councilmember Say.
Yes, Liz, could you share with us any examples of these particular facilities that are in Councilmember Cordero's district and the district I represent? Would the Kalakaua be one of them? Or would Kahala Nui, one Kalakaua, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Alex, any examples you could share with us that what we're talking about? It's not the big ones that it's in District 5, right? One Kalakaua, the Plaza.
Special needs housing ones? Yeah. I actually don't know any of them. I think it is those Plaza ones.
So sorry, we're trying to think. There are very, very few conditional use permits for special needs housing for the elderly. The last one I can think of was about 10 years ago, and I believe that it may have been on Kalakaua, it may have been on Kapiolani. I didn't work on it, I didn't supervise it at the time, but that's the last one I can think of. In terms of group living facilities, there are definitely a lot more of, your more like your bread and butter group living facilities that are occurring in residential districts. I can think of, say, the one in Upper Nu'uanu that was built in the last 10 years. And then, of course, there are several that are quite old that have permits dating back to the 80s.
The reason why I pose this question, Liz, yeah, I've seen a proliferation in regards to group living, special needs facilities, converting one's residential home to a group living. And the only point I like to make this morning is the fact that when that occurs, do they come before the neighborhood board to share with the residents this is what we're doing, or they just go through the administrative ministerial process in applying?
If they have 8 or fewer care recipients and they're licensed by the state, then they don't have to go to the neighborhood board.
Okay.
But if they have more than 8, they do have to go to the neighborhood board. And if they're not licensed, 6 or more, they have to go to the neighborhood board before they apply for a conditional use permit.
Okay, no, because, we're just creating more problems for state and county government when I see what's happening in regards to group living facilities. Now having to agree in regards to the inspections of these facilities to see that the quality of service for those residents are at that particular level. And there was, past a lot of opposition to this surprise visit. And that's why I bring this up as far as enforcement. Okay, but, at some point in time, that number 8 has to go up, because that's the only way you're going to survive as far as keeping the fees low for these particular individuals, but also trying to survive in the economic climate. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The last discussion we will have on group living has to do with the 1,000-foot distance provision. I'm hoping to have a robust discussion on whether the committee is inclined to include as part of the large and small that are not regulated group living use standards that a 1,000-foot distance between the next closest large group living facility be required in the country residential and A1 zoning districts. The current LUO provides that unless directed related to public health and safety, a group living facility must not be located within 1,000 feet of the next closest group living facility, and provides an exception to this restriction for multifamily dwellings that provide housing for the University of Hawaii students or staff. DPP, did you have anything to add to this before I ask the members if they are open to reinserting this prohibition?
I think we could maybe go straight to questions, and then I can respond to any questions about that.
Sure. Members, I guess I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts? So it was taken out in previous drafts of this bill, and I am proposing to reinsert it. So again, do you have any thoughts on reinserting the prohibition in the country residential and A1 standards? Districts. Sorry.
Chair, I have a question for you. I was wondering if we know why it was removed out of earlier reiterations of the bill?
Actually, DPP might know.
Oh, okay.
Do you understand? Do you know why it was taken out?
I don't entirely remember the full process of things. I know that we have been repeatedly kind of looking at the infrastructure questions. We're more able now than we had been in the past to be able to kind of quickly evaluate infrastructure availability for facilities. That may have been one of the reasons that it was taken out. The reasons that it was there in those particular districts, actually it was in all districts, but the reason I believe that Chair Kia Aina is proposing the limited districts that she is because the character of those districts could significantly change if group living facilities were allowed to be in very close proximity together, which would put pressure on the infrastructure that was designed for single-family residential, or maybe two-family residential, or even low-density apartment. So that was one of the reasons to keep it there. There are other, there are other potential reasons to take it out. So it's definitely a discussion point.
And Vice Chair, I want to make clear that I was very specific in the areas that I felt that the prohibition should be reinserted because I have heard of concerns in some neighborhoods when they're right next to each other. And so, you know, sometimes communities, I know we have to be very considerate of, constitutional concerns relating to fair housing. But at the same time, when you just, I mean, why don't you spread it around as opposed to just having them located right next to each other in a residential neighborhood, for example? But I wanted to know your thoughts.
Well, first off, I know I still have the floor for this part, but I was just wondering. I just have a comment relating to when we do approve such uses, especially if they are state regulated and they do come before us for zoning. I mean, isn't their application part of looking at the infrastructure as well? And then if it doesn't apply or if it doesn't meet the infrastructure capacity, then they're denied, right?
That's right. Right now, in Article 5 of the LUO, there is a prohibition on 1,000-foot distance, and the director's ability to modify that is I believe if it's directly related to health and safety. So I guess this, when somebody comes in and there's another facility within 1,000 feet, they're just told that this site isn't eligible. So perhaps what would make sense is to have the separation distance and maybe create something broader than health and safety. But definitely infrastructure is reviewed as part of the conditional use permit and part of the building permit plans.
Okay, thank you. Because I mean, currently, of course, in all of our neighborhoods, we do have a lot that are already next to each other, which has been okay for capacity right now. But if we add more, I understand they would probably be rejected. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Any other Manao? Councilmember Wire.
Thank you. Questions, if I may, just following up on that. So say it was a licensed, or it fell under, was it HRS Chapter 46, I think, or the section we were discussing earlier. Would that preempt this particular portion, or can we still limit care homes in that way?
If it's 8 or fewer licensed by the state, then there's no separation distance.
Okay, because of the state law.
That's right, and because we don't require a conditional use permit or any permit. It's a permitted principal use with no conditions. You know, in other words, it's not a conditional use, it's a principal permitted use.
Okay, and sorry, I know you're kind of discussing it, but could you just walk me through again the some of the potential bases you could deny a conditional use permit for? Or maybe the bigger ones or just general ones, so we have an understanding. It's not like this is a by right type of project.
Sure. It is definitely the case that with federal fair housing regulations, we would have to have a very good reason to deny a facility. But let's say that we have a zoning lot at the end of a long private lane that is only 15 feet wide. That would create, say, traffic problems and potentially problems where emergency vehicles couldn't get to the site. And we would say that that wasn't a safe place to have a large group living facility. That might be part of our analysis, something like that. Or if the availability of water isn't there, they don't have water pressure in order to do fire protection, those would be reasons to deny, but they're very specific. And they're not related to kind of the feelings of the neighbors, if that makes sense.
Totally does. Thank you. Mahalo, Chair. And just a comment, and I think I understand reasons on both sides, so I'll defer to you on this particular amendment.
Vice Chair Cordero.
I'm in support of your reinserting it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Say.
Madam Chair, may I be the opposite, take the opposite tact? Is that okay?
I'm sorry?
May I take the opposite tact that we don't need the prohibition? And the reason why I would say we don't need the prohibition within 1,000 feet of each other is that you have better competition of services.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
As a person who may qualify one day, Madam Chair, I'm going to look for the best deal I can get. Thank you.
Easy there. Okay, members, if you don't mind, this is a big issue with regard to multi-unit dwellings, so I'm going to move on to that topic. As you know, for the most part, no residential uses are currently permitted in B1 and B2 zoning districts. As stated in the LUO, the purpose of the business districts is to set aside areas for commercial and business activities to meet and support the economic growth of the city. It envisions that other uses that are supportive and compatible with business activities will also be permitted. The idea is that these districts help to ensure a favorable business climate and support the economic and social well-being of city residents. As originally introduced, Bill 10, 2022 would permit multi-unit dwellings, such as apartment buildings, in the B1 and B2 zoning districts, provided that dwelling units were located above the commercial use. Many ideas were floated by various council members on these issues, and by the time this measure was assigned to this committee, the draft had been modified. The FD1 continues to allow multi-unit dwellings in the B1 and B2 zoning districts, but only in the primary urban center development plan and the EVA development plan areas, and only if certain requirements are met, namely meeting non-residential floor area minimums. It did, however, expand the measure to allow standalone residential projects with additional requirements. I support expanding areas where residential uses can occur to accelerate development to address the city's housing crisis, meet existing demand, and provide local families options to stay in their communities and to stay here home in Hawaii. I definitely want to strike the right balance, while also ensuring the requirements are not so onerous that it prevents development. In an effort to get feedback, my team and I have reached out to developers that have previously provided their thoughts on Bill 10 or Bill 64, business stakeholder organizations like the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Development Center, as well as housing stakeholders to alert them to this hearing and ask for input on these requirements. What I'm looking for from committee members is to hear from you today about your thoughts on what the non-residential or business commercial floor area minimum should be specifically. What should the non-residential commercial floor minimum be when allowing residential units to be above non-residential spaces? And second, what should the non-residential commercial minimum be when allowing standalone multi-unit dwellings with only residential units and no commercial component? The FD1 currently requires a FAR of 0.2 of non-residential floor area for properties where the residential uses will be above the non-residential uses. I understand that this may significantly limit the height of the building, and that accordingly, the DPP supports eliminating or reducing this FAR requirement for these types of projects. I agree and would eliminate the FAR requirement and instead require that the entire multi-unit dwelling have at least one non-residential use, as recommended by Councilmember Dos Santos Tam, while maintaining the requirement that residential uses cannot occur on the bottom floor. For situations where standalone residential projects would be allowed, the FD1 breaks it up into 3 scenarios. On zoning lots 4 to 7 acres, on zoning lots over 7 acres, and for all other zoning lots, which would be for lots less than 4 acres. For zoning lots 4 to 7 acres, the FD1 requires a minimum of 10,000 square feet of non-residential or commercial space. An example is a Starbucks or a 7-Eleven store. For zoning lots over 7 acres, the FD1 requires a minimum of 40,000 square feet of non-residential or commercial space. An example of that is likely a grocery store. For all other zoning lots, which are less than 4 acres, the FD1 will require a FAR of 0.2. My proposed amendments include blanks for the non-residential requirements for the first 2 scenarios, as I am really hoping to get feedback from you and the public about what the right minimum floor area requirement for non-residential or commercial space is that ensures the purpose of the B1 and B2 zoning districts are met, but also ensures that these changes lead to more housing construction. So if you don't mind, I'm going to lead off some questions for DPP. Can you share with the members some key highlights from Departmental Communication 583-2022 about existing B1 and B2 zoning districts?
Sure, and thanks again. Alex Beatty with DPP. What we found is that the B1 and B2 districts are really underdeveloped considering the max density that's allowed. Almost 1/10 what we would allow in floor area is what we're seeing kind of across the board. We saw that as an opportunity. We're also looking for new places for housing within places that are already urbanized and allow urban uses, so that seemed like a real opportunity. So we went and looked for the plans to see what the plans all suggest. So the development plans, the sustainable community plans, and pleasantly surprised to find that all of them had support for this type of change. So that's kind of the highlights. So we drafted some amendments to recommend allowing housing in different styles in those districts.
For non-residential requirements, D.R. Horton supports the FD1's minimum non-residential requirements and has shared that their current projects on zoning lots that are 4 to 7 acres struggle to support 9,000 square feet of commercial use. Do you have any thoughts on the non-residential requirements and specifically on what D.R. Horton has shared?
So the 10,000 and 40,000 square feet was from the data that D.R. Horton and Colliers had shared with us. We felt that that was a reasonable amount in those instances to ensure some amount of commercial use was happening and that the purpose and intent of the B1 and B2 districts was maintained. That said, there is a wide continuum of reasonableness. So with the 10,000 and 40,000 square foot.
Can you have the mic up closer so we can hear you better? Thank you.
Rarely am I told to talk louder. There's a pretty wide continuum of reasonableness between what's 10,000 and 40,000 square feet and having an FAR. And as proposed now, it would likely result in more greenfield type development having a large residential component. Some of the larger parcels out in Ho'opili or Koa Ridge, they would be able to take advantage of this opportunity. If swung in the other direction using just a FAR minimum, like 0.1 or 0.3, somewhere in between there, it would be more infill existing developments that already have a fair amount of commercial activity happening. And then they would be able to add floors. I don't know, I think of malls as being a prime example of that sort of thing, or strip malls, being able to add additional height. Again, all of this is within the framework of the underlying zoning district. We're not talking about adding new height. It would just be allowing a new use to happen that might be able to take advantage of unused height and not allowing any additional floor area, just creating an opportunity to develop floor area for housing, which we need so badly. I'm really interested to hear what the council members think. Like I said, there's a pretty broad continuum. We support what was proposed with the 10,000 and 40,000 square feet, but if the council went in another direction, there's a pretty wide range that the DPP would still support and think that it would be a good idea.
And actually, before I move to other topics, I would like that dialogue. Do any members have any questions with regard to the requirements, minimum requirements? Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, and thank you for the explanation and the in-depth analysis. I'm just wondering if it'd be simpler because I know one of the proposed amendments was not allowing residential on the ground floor, I believe. Would it be simpler just for that to be the standard, or would that overcomplicate things because we might have non-commercial portions of the property?
That would be simpler, although it wouldn't account for some of the larger parcels because it would, let's imagine that there's a 7-acre parcel undeveloped in B2. If you were required to do the whole ground floor as commercial, it would be nearly impossible to develop at max capacity with a housing component. It's easy, that kind of standard would be really easy to apply in the places where infill would happen, the Wailais and Nu'uanus, the more historic commercial corridors that have a finer grained urban fabric and smaller lots. But these large lot greenfield developments, there would be no new housing development happening on those lots because of how cool the commercial market is right now.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I'll ask one more question. And then
Yes, if any other comments, Councilmember Say, and this is specifically with regard to the minimum non-residential requirements.
Yeah, would it have been easier if we go on a percentage basis of the square footage of what the total property is?
That's another option. So having it scale to just set, having a ground floor and then above is residential I think is one really good option to deal with existing buildings and existing commercial corridors. And then having an FAR would be something that's scalable. The issue with that is the scales can get so out of hand so fast when you're talking about both a 25,000 square foot lot and a 17-acre lot that the FAR almost scales too high too fast. So it would have to be, in order to be effective, it would have to be so low that it would then kind of call into question, is this enough? Like it would be 0.1 or 0.5 or something like that.
And then the other question, Alex, I have is basically that as you look towards the future again, mom and pops are, diminishing. Are we focusing our attention for these commercial businesses to be manufacturing, bakeries, et cetera, because of what has happened in the global market in regards to acquisition of online sales?
I think that is a yes, and that was a separate discussion when we talked about some of the industrial uses and allowing some of those uses in the business areas. There's some really low impact productive uses that can and should be allowed in the business districts to accommodate small scale bakeries and that type of thing. So it's not a home occupation, it's a commercial activity, but yeah.
One final question. Thank you very much, because on 11th Avenue onto the on-ramp, we have that small business, 1010, that one that does the fashion designing, clothing.
Mm-hmm.
That is residential and commercial. Is that an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really great example is anywhere you see ground floor, anything built prior to 1960 probably, ground floor commercial uses with residences above. It was such a common setup, and we still see it everywhere. A lot of those, because of the unfortunately overly rigid B1 and B2 district applications, that's of an older mindset. A lot of those upstairs units had to go away and are now offices or storage or unused. There's a lot of unused second floor and third floor in our commercial districts that there's just not enough market to keep them operable, so they are vacant.
Councilmember Wire?
Thank you, Chair. I was curious if, since DPP looked through all the different development plans or the sustainable community plans, any analysis that came from the Central Oahu plan?
Yeah, it is in the transmittal, the departmental communication. We pulled out the relevant sections of each plan. Sure. So in Central Oahu, the recommendation was to permit multifamily residential uses above the first floor and to include it wherever possible in commercial centers. And then we also noted that many TOD and suburban mixed-use communities are located in this area, such as Waipahu and Koa Ridge. So those are all places where housing is appropriate in a lot of different formats. So both above and as part of a larger commercial independent housing style development.
Okay, appreciate that. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to some other questions. IMX 1, Castle and Cook's testimony recommends allowing multi-unit dwellings in the industrial mixed-use districts, particularly in the primary urban center development plan area, which would cover Iwalei and Kapalama TOD areas. Do the relevant neighborhood TOD plans, which are slowly coming before the council for zoning amendments, allow multi-unit dwellings in the IMX 1 zoning district?
Yes, with a special district permit. You can have up to 10 dwelling units in the IMX district per zoning lot with a special district permit.
Okay, property taxes. I'm not sure whether you can weigh in on this, but the issue of property tax being skewed for residential properties in business districts was raised in a letter to the editor to the Star Advertiser yesterday. We already have business mixed-use districts that allow commercial and residential use. Do you know whether residential uses in the B1 and B2 zoning districts would be classified as residential for property tax purposes?
I do not, but I would be surprised if the tax office didn't have some sort of way to differentiate between a residential use in a condominium tower and a commercial use in a condominium tower.
Can we work on just getting that information in preparation for March's hearing?
Sure.
And I guess members, this is a time to, if you have any initial thoughts on what we've been talking about, or do you have any other questions relating to the issue of, the multi-unit dwellings? I am, and Councilmember Wire, I am going to be talking about the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan, but not right now. I just wanted to finish the line of questions that I just asked.
Okay. I'll hold off. No
Okay.
questions right now, Mahalo.
So I just wanted to let the members know that for your consideration and in preparation for the March 7th meeting, I have printed for you Departmental Communication 583-2022 to share data that the DPP compiled for all the B1 and B2 districts in the city, as well as development maps from the PUC Development Plan, EVA Development Plan, and Central Oahu Sustainable Community Sustainable Plan. Additionally, I would recommend you look at the testimonies from the various stakeholders, including from developers and related stakeholders who have provided relevant data. The DPP has recommended, and I am inclined to propose an amendment that would allow multi-unit dwellings in the B1 and B2 zoning districts in the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan area. I did want to note that this amendment that would be consistent with Section 310.1 general policies of the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan, which states that multifamily residential use is permitted above the first floor and wherever possible in commercial centers. DPP included this language in Departmental Communication 583-2022 to remind members of the plan language. I asked DPP to have the map for this area so that members can see exactly what we are referring to. And so clerks, if you can pull these maps up, you can also see the list of the B1 and B2 zoning districts in these areas in Departmental Communication 2022 as well. It appears that council members Okimoto, Wire, and Tolba's council districts include parts of the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan area. So I would really like to hear from these members. Do any of you have thoughts on expanding multi-unit dwellings in B1 and B2 zoning districts in these areas? Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. I actually really welcome the conversation. At this time, I'm going to be seeking more community input, and so hope to provide that at the next committee meeting. Just if I may quickly ask DPP to reiterate, because I know you mentioned it before, so this wouldn't alter, unless of course amendments are made, any height limits is applicable to the current zoning lots?
Correct. Yeah, we felt it really important that any new allowance didn't mess with the community's already anticipated character for these sites. No additional density, no additional height, same standards for yards and setbacks and parking and all of the other things.
Okay, appreciate that. And so I think that that'll be helpful, and I look forward to the conversation, Chair.
Councilmember Okimoto?
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the visuals of the map. I agree with Councilmember Wire. I'd like to take it back to my community. I know that in the specific area of Mililani, from my understanding, I was trying to visualize where else we could develop. I know that there's a need for homes, and I agree with Councilmember Say that we can't continually just put them into the urban core. However, one thing that I would really like to just discuss is the impact on the roads, because H2 is very limited. So I know right now we have Coral Ridge that's still being developed, and that's a positive as we address the housing need. I know that there's another area in the Waiawa part of my district that that was planned before but never came through. So we'd have to look into that, but we'd have to really work with the state DOT to see what can be done to address the traffic concerns that will probably be caused if we continue to develop in that part of my district. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And do any of the other members, Vice Chair Cordero or Councilmember Say, do you have any mana'o on the inclusion of this plan as part of the scope?
I would be in strong support since we're sharing the pain.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'm going to move on to another issue regarding accessory dwelling units. The FD1 proposes substantial changes to the accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, accessory use, including increasing the maximum size of an ADU on smaller lots from 400 feet to 500 square feet, eliminating requirements for owners to live in either the principal dwelling or the ADU, eliminating the prohibition for ADUs on zoning lots of less than 3,500 square feet and for lots that already have more than one dwelling unit, and exempting parking requirements or ADUs in the primary urban center development plan area if the property is within 800 feet of a bus stop. The FD1 does, however, maintain the prohibition on subjecting the property to a condominium property regime, to separate ownership of the ADU from the principal dwelling, and to ensure that the dwellings are used for residential uses. My only substantive proposed amendments are to reinsert the existing prohibition against permitting ADUs on landlocked zoning lots and expanding the parking exemption to include the EVA development plan area. DPP, do you have anything to add about the proposed amendments for ADUs, including the proposed parking exemptions?
Thank you, Chair. We are generally broadly supportive of all of these changes to the ADU provisions. The accessory dwelling units are a key component for creating affordable housing, especially infill affordable housing. Regarding parking, I'll be very interested to see what kind of conversation we have here. We already have an option for a zoning adjustment to remove parking that not too many ADU providers have taken advantage of. So I'm on one side, I think that there's a lot of consideration regarding parking waivers or parking reductions, but on the other side, I think that there are a lot of market pressures to provide as much parking as possible, since units with parking have higher rents and that kind of thing. So yeah, we'll be interested to hear the discussion, and I'm available for questions.
Just one more question on this for you. Testifiers have recommended expanding the parking exemption to the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan area as well. Currently, it's for the PUC, and then this amendment is for the EVA Development Plan area. So do you have any thoughts on the expansion of that?
I do have some thoughts. Interestingly, much of the Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan residential area many of those residential areas are subject to like community associations and deed restrictions that are in many cases more restrictive than our zoning provisions. So in much of Central Oahu, it potentially wouldn't matter even if we did allow ADUs and if we did allow no parking for ADUs. That said, the consideration would be for older neighborhoods like Wahiwa, potentially parts of Mililani. So those discussions would be very interesting to have right now. As I understand it, the provision is for zoning lots within 800 feet of a bus stop. We think that it would be a good idea to maybe get some information from the Department of Transportation Services about bus stops in particular, because some bus stops are serviced regularly every 10 minutes all day till 11 p.m. and other areas might only be serviced once an hour, something like that. So very interesting food for thought for sure based on that testimony that was received just this week.
Members, do you have any questions relating to ADU for DPP? If not, I'm going to move on to Ohana units. With respect to the Ohana unit accessory use, which encourages extended family living, my proposed amendments are primarily for clarity and to move standards from LUO Article 8 to Article 5 for clarity and consistency purposes. That is all. Now we are going to move on to home occupations. I have not made any recommended amendments to the home occupation accessory use yet. I anticipate preparing amendments for the March 7th committee meeting. In preparation for possible amendments, I'm hoping to use this meeting to remind ourselves and the public about what a home occupation is and the types of activities that are and are not permitted as a home occupation use. Mahalo to Councilmember Dos Santos Tam for his proposed amendments. I will make recommendation on those as we prepare for the March meeting. Bill 64 FD1 defines home occupation as any activity intended to produce income that is carried on within a dwelling unit, accessory structure to a dwelling unit, or on a zoning lot used principally for residential purposes and includes the use of any residential premise as a base for an off-premise income-producing activity. The measure also explicitly prohibits certain uses as home occupation: commercial vehicle repair and painting, uses permitted exclusively in the industrial districts, commercial weddings, storage and base yards, mail and package handling and delivery businesses, sale of guns, and assembly of employees. Some examples of home occupation include home childcare, group instruction, providing services like therapy, massages, hairdressing, selling homemade items, home offices, car sharing, etc. The use has very strict standards in both the current LUO and the FD1 to ensure that these uses are incidental and subordinate to use of a property for residential living. Some topics that I thought would be good for us to discuss today include employees in general, employees for home-based childcare, car repairs and painting, car sharing off-street parking generally, other than car sharing, commercial weddings, assembly and mail and package handling and delivery businesses. So my questions for DPP first relates to employees. The current FD1 prohibits home occupations from having employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you share the rationale for that prohibition?
The rationale for a prohibition on employees within home occupations is the idea that it is a home occupation for the people who live there, that it isn't an employee center or a place where employees would come to do the work. In the current LUO, there are provisions for assistance for childcare providers, particularly when they're sick. But the employee prohibition has been in the LUO since the 1980s.
What if the employee works remotely at their own house? Can the business operating out of a home have an employee?
Yes, absolutely. There's a difference between a home occupation and, say, a business where somebody has a home office and that kind of thing. Home occupations, by definition, are very tricky in terms of that they require a lot of logic games. But you definitely could have a home occupation where you also have an office elsewhere, and that office elsewhere may have employees that also work from home.
What if the employee visits the business operating out of a home irregularly or sparingly?
Irregularly or sparingly, that would be fine, essentially because a home occupation is supposed to be invisible from the exterior wherever there aren't land use impacts that, that sort of goes forward. So obviously we're not regulating somebody's employee coming every now and again to their home office.
Are there other ways to mitigate impacts other than completely prohibiting employees? For example, standards that limit foot traffic or limiting the number of employees allowed on site at one time. I can see how group instruction and sale of items, which are allowed as home occupations, can be more impactful than allowing limited employees in terms of noise.
Sure, there are definitely ways that land use impacts could be identified and mitigated if employees were operating out of a home occupation. Definitely from enforcement, from the enforcement side, there would have to be some pretty clear standards.
Members, do you have any questions regarding just overall employees? I'm going to have a separate question on home-based childcare. Councilmember Wire.
Thank you. I'm just curious, what if an employee resides in the home and, say, a family member, a child, something like that? Is that included, excluded?
That's totally fine under the current definition.
Okay, mahalo.
Councilmember Cordero and I forgot to mention, in addition to questions from for DPP, I would like to hear your thoughts on whether we should allow employees or non-family members.
Okay, thank you. So yes, but I would like also clarification, or just to hear about the parking, parking that you're offering in your amendment, Chair.
We don't have any amendments yet for home occupation.
I think you mentioned off-street.
I think it was for ADU, yeah?
Oh, was that for ADU? Oh, excuse me.
Wait, but do you have any questions for DPP?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Okimoto.
Could you clarify, Chair, and maybe DPP about the employees? Because I read that, and Councilmember Meyer asked, you can have an employee if it's a family member. Chair, did you ask about?
Yes, maybe she can answer that and maybe clarify you about what.
Could you clarify, so is it a family member, and are they allowed if it's not a family member? I wasn't sure if I heard correctly.
Yeah, so under the definition of family, some people are related by blood marriage or adoption, and otherwise a family can be considered 5 unrelated people. So you could have any combination of a family living in a dwelling unit, and multiple members of that family could have a home occupation. So that home occupation may be one business, they might be multiple businesses. It doesn't specify that, if one member bakes cookies and another member gives guitar lessons, they can both be functioning out of that same dwelling unit, provided it's still clearly incidental and subordinate and does not have externalities.
But any other outside employee for this small business, is that allowed for a person to come in during the day and work with they have to be living in the home?
That's right, they would have to be living on premises.
Okay.
No.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the home-based childcare. I understand that under the FD1, home-based childcare allows non-household members to provide childcare services temporarily if the resident caregiver is ill or has an emergency. I also understand that there have been some discussion on whether home-based childcare specifically should be allowed to have one non-household employee to meet childcare demands, but also to help support a pipeline for pre-kindergarten teachers. Do you have thoughts on allowing one non-household employee for childcare?
Yes, we had some discussions with the Department of Community Services about this, and they provided some very interesting and good rationale for having additional care, and particularly it being the idea that there would be more professionals to care for the children that are in the care home. Most of those care home, I say care home, I mean childcare. Most of those childcare providers are operating under the state patch system. And they have other state requirements regarding their own certifications and that kind of thing. So for students who are trying to get a certain number of hours in order to qualify for pre-kindergarten or other childcare professions, they are very interested in this being an option for them to get the hours that they need. So they're basically saying that they can provide better care for the keiki, and they can also provide, again, this pipeline for newer professionals.
Thank you. Members, I just want to say that if there will be any allowance for non-household employees, clearly we would make sure that the parking issue was addressed. Do any of you have any questions further on overall employees or home-based childcare? Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. And Liz, I'm just curious if there's a need to even specify the number of employees, since we're already limiting the number of children, so it's 6 children, and I would think that if we're contemplating employee needs or children's needs, that it might be dependent on the specific population they're working with, right? Like if they're autistic, maybe need skills trainers versus a different setup, or like preschool training, something like that.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I would have to think about that kind of in terms of the other regulations, but I think you're right that where the number of children is limited, the number of care providers would automatically be limited. One of the things that we had considered in the past, and I don't honestly remember if it's in the FD1, was the question of sort of 24/7 care. So we wanted to make sure that the allowance to have employees didn't allow suddenly a child care provider to be doing overnight 24/7 care because they have enough employees to essentially have this this type of provision. So I know that a couple of times when we had that discussion, we put in hours of operation or specified not 24-hour care, something like that. But I don't remember if that's in the FD1 right now.
Any other questions? I'm going to move on to car repairs and painting. The FD1 prohibits this use, I assume because of environmental impacts and noise. I am inclined to continue to prohibit such use, but did note testimony recommending that it be allowed. So I guess I did want the thoughts of DPP as well as members of the committee. So DPP first.
Chair, can you please clarify for me, are we talking about
car repairs and painting?
Car repairs and painting, both repairs and painting, or one or the other?
Both.
Okay. At present, in the past, the DPP provided the allowance to do car painting of personal vehicles at home, limited to 5. There were some very specific things going on in the early 90s. And at the time, they specified that that could happen as long as it was in a fully enclosed structure. find that based on the level of input that we get from the community, people working on vehicles outside and just with noise and materials, it tends to be very impactful. Particularly right now when you have people operating, say, a Turo thing where they have 12 vehicles and they seem to constantly be working on something, that use tends to become very, very problematic for the neighborhood.
Members, any thoughts on that? Councilmember Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first off, of course, we do have a lot of people, like in all of our residential areas, that do such activities at their home. But something that has been coming up lately in my Kalihi area is when the paints start to go into our streets, and because we lack drainage and other types of systems, the paint along with the rains starts to go down the roads and just accumulate at other people's homes and properties. So, with this deliberation, it's rough because I mean I do want to allow it, but the impact of the I guess the paint and the materials in the street and to other people's properties is a difficult balance. So I'm having a hard time myself with this part because I do want to allow at least some car maintenance and painting.
Okay, so just if you could just take some time to take a look at it before the next hearing. Members, any other, Councilmember Wire?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And Liz, first, could you remind us what the current law is on this?
Yeah, currently vehicle repair is not allowed as a home occupation. That is not the same thing as working on your own vehicle. And then again, vehicle painting, I believe you're allowed to do your own vehicle 5 times a year.
Okay, and I'm curious if you're aware of any NOVs or enforcement actions on this particular issue, because I think it is happening, right?
Yes, that's a very good question. I didn't look or ask our customer services division how many NOVs they think that they would issue a year for this kind of thing. I know that Turo operators have been getting a lot of NOVs because they are taking something like 29 vehicles and parking them all over the neighborhood, which obviously is not allowed as a home occupation. So I'd be curious to see how many of those NOVs also had something like vehicle repair.
Okay, I'll be brief, Chair, but I'm curious, so is the Turo easier to enforce because the advertising, or do we know why that's, and if you don't know, that's okay, I'm just curious.
I think the proliferation of Turo was very sudden, and I think it was very related to like those COVID times where all of a sudden used vehicle prices were going through the roof and everything like that. But I think part of the reason that it was easier to enforce on them is because they just had so many vehicles. They were so impactful. They had so many neighbors calling about them because it was a quiet street, suddenly had literally 30 cars parked on it. So that's, I think, the bigger reason.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, and Chair, so I do share, I think, some of Councilmember Cordero's concerns. I think just as of today, I think we do see impact on communities with folks maybe having like 5, 6, 7 cars parked on the street, bringing it in. I don't know if there's a way to hone in on maybe where it happens. I know not everyone has an enclosed garage. A lot of people have carports, so I don't want to say like it has to be in a garage, but if the car maybe has to be on the property the whole time or something like that. But I'm open to, I'll continue looking at it as well.
And just for the members, I will be talking about other issues here, off-street parking and peer-to-peer car sharing. If not, I'm going to move on to weddings. Councilmember Okimoto.
Thank you, Chair. Could you clarify, just so we can have, for my knowledge and maybe the public, because I agree with Councilmember Wire, we see an influx of this in my community specifically, and even within a big association, they don't have any control over it. It's deferred back to the city, but it's not enforced. So could you remind me, from my understanding with the Turo business, it's allowed, but it's just they can't advertise out of their home? Is that what the procedures are? And so I'm looking to find a way to how to enforce it so that we can get the NOVs under control somehow, and we're not having 30 cars in one street.
Sure, yes. The director made an interpretation when it became a big issue, and this is based on past interpretations, which we'll discuss more, but vehicles associated with a home occupation are not allowed to park on the street. That's the first point. And then the second point is vehicles associated with a home occupation may be parked on the site, but they're limited to 2. So touro operators can operate out of there as a home occupation, provided that they whatever vehicles they have are parked in a place that allows commercial parking, other than 2 as a maximum.
And do you have any?
Councilmember, if you don't mind, I want to limit that discussion to car repairs and painting because we're having a different dialogue. Do you mind?
For sure.
Then, so I'm just going to move on. I'm going to move on.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to, because we're going to have a dialogue on that. So I'm going to move to weddings. The FD1 prohibits commercial weddings, which I understand is not explicit in the current LUO. What is intended to be covered by the prohibition? The ceremony, the reception, photography? What about wedding planning services, other related services for off-site events?
Yes, so weddings that are occurring on site are a business that we see throughout the island. So the prohibition on commercial weddings would be the idea of having weddings that occur on your site for people, say, that are not related to the homeowners. Like, there are people that say, hey, I want to have my daughter's wedding here. I want to have my best friend's wedding here. That's not what we're trying to eliminate. What we're trying to eliminate is people who have tourists showing up sometimes multiple times a day, along with, say, catering and all kinds of other things. Now, today, that's prohibited because you cannot have employees. However, if everybody who works at the wedding, for the wedding, also lives in the house, and somehow you manage to not have impacts that make it bigger than accessory, well, then they are not explicitly prohibited.
Members, do you have any questions on weddings? Because I'm going to move to assembly. The FD1 prohibits assembly. What is an example of this? What about Avon and Tupperware meetings where people assemble packets?
Yes, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that the city council in the 1980s was trying to prohibit, was this sort of gathering of a bunch of people who maybe have a multi-level marketing business, and they come together once a week to talk about their businesses, that kind of thing, along with any other type of assembling of employees. So before we talked about how you might have multiple employees all working for the same company, but all working at their own homes. If they're gathering in one location on a regular basis, that's prohibited.
And is there a minimum number of people that constitutes assembly?
Traditionally, that has been looked at on a case-by-case basis. People might write in and say how many times they're gathering, how many people they're having on the site, and for what purpose. So I know that the department has responded in the past to say something like, well, once every 6 months, you're having 8 people come to your house. That can be considered accessory to your primary use as a dwelling unit.
Members, did you have any questions on that? I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is mail and package handling and delivery businesses. Can you elaborate on what exactly we're talking about here?
Yes, this also is a really old provision, and I think that it was specifically designed for those types of uses where somebody would say, I'll order it for you. I'll order a bunch of Trader Joe's or IKEA stuff for you. I'll have it shipped to me and then I'll deliver it to you. That was, I think, the 1980s version of this. But this could also be considered something like, again, if you are buying a whole bunch of things and have regular deliveries and then you're turning around and delivering them elsewhere, that's prohibited.
Questions? Councilmember Wire.
So, I mean, would this apply to someone that's like buying and reselling stuff on like Amazon?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what this was targeting was regular UPS deliveries to your house. So if it was day after day after day deliveries, that was impactful to the neighborhood. And of course, that again was from a time period before we were all ordering so much online. I don't think it would automatically prohibit something like buying and selling on eBay, but if you were having it delivered to you and then ordering a pickup and somebody called to say, hey, this person is getting multiple deliveries, I think under this provision we could tell them that they're exceeding the scale of what's allowed under a group living facility and need to scale it back.
Members, any other questions? We are now going to move on to peer-to-peer car sharing. I understand that some people may use their homes for peer-to-peer car sharing. Specifically, they manage reservations on their home computer or their phone at home and/or park the vehicle used in the car sharing businesses when it is not being rented on their property and/or use their property to meet up with peer-to-peer car sharing customers. Is that currently allowed under the current, is that currently allowed under the LUO and under the FD1?
Under the LUO, it is allowed, along with the conditions that I said before. So under the Department of Planning and Permitting administrative rules, the director is authorized to do interpretations where the code is unclear about something. In 2005, the director did an interpretation about how many vehicles could be parked on site. Under the authority that gave the director the ability to determine parking standards for those uses that weren't specifically called out. That was when they determined that two vehicles relating to the home occupation could be parked on a site under a home occupation. So the same applies to this peer-to-peer car rental, is that you could have two vehicles on your site.
Under the FD1?
Under the FD1, I think it's silent on this particular issue.
What parking restrictions exist for these home occupations now, as well as under the FD1?
Home occupations are not allowed to park any vehicles on the street. That's in the FD1 and that's now. And then of course, as I discussed, the director's interpretations going back from 2005 and then I think last year relating specifically to Turo. I should say peer-to-peer.
And I'm just assuming, of course, it's because of the impact on communities. That's the basis for the restrictions, correct? The parking restrictions.
Yes, absolutely. We don't just see, say, a company car. We see people trying to park tow trucks, buses, trailers, vans, moving trucks, limousines, all kinds of different types of vehicles.
So those are all prohibited, correct?
They may not park on the street. They may have two commercial vehicles on the site if they're able to, if they have space and if they still have the room for their regular principal use parking.
Okay, thank you. And members, you have any questions regarding this topic, peer-to-peer car sharing? Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, Liz. So the two vehicles that have to be on site are the ones associated with the business? So a homeowner could put personal vehicles on the street, or?
Yeah, they're not supposed to replace their personal vehicle parking spaces with those home occupation spaces.
Okay.
That said, in practice, I'm sure a lot of people maybe have, like, even if they have 2 parking spaces for their home and 2 parking spaces for their company vehicles, they may still have personal vehicles that they park on the street.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Okimoro.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go along those same lines that I was asking in the the previous discussion. So thank you for clarifying what's allowed and what's not. And that was a really great question that Councilmember Wire asked. I'm trying to figure out how we can better enforce this, because it sounds like unless a neighbor goes and complains, and I'm just envisioning my neighborhood, people aren't willing to just go and tell their neighbors. But how is this enforced right now, and what happens if there are, cars that appear and you can see activity that's not normal to the household members? What can be done? What is done? These NOVs that are given, who's giving them? Is it only after somebody complains and then does the police come, and what kind of consequences are given after that?
Sure. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways that the community can reach out to the city about that. Number one, if vehicles are parked on the sidewalk or illegally parked, that's an HPD question. If they believe that an unauthorized use or a use that's exceeding the scale of a home occupation is occurring, they can go to our website, honolulu.gov/DPP, and there are ways to submit requests for investigation that are anonymous. You can put your name won't be released, but you can also straight up do it anonymous. If you do it anonymous, then the inspector can't contact you afterwards, but you can submit that digitally. You could also call the Department of Planning and Permitting to make a verbal request for investigation. You could also contact a council member who can contact DPP, although it's a lot faster to just go straight to our website, fill out that form, and submit it.
And so let's say a complaint or a concern is brought to the attention of the department. What happens then? I mean, do you go and contact the homeowner? They could just say, well, no, those are not my cars. Or how do you proceed after you get a concerned complaint?
Once a complaint is received, it gets assigned to an inspector, and then the inspector goes out to the site. The inspector, of course, has a difficult job, right? They need to try to observe what they can see. They also can often ask the homeowner questions, or they ask the operator questions. If no one's home, they'll leave a door hanger to say, please contact me. That gives the operator the opportunity to explain what they're doing, because they may actually just be working on their own vehicle or something like that. Then the inspector has to determine whether a violation has occurred. If a violation has occurred, and notice of violation is issued to the landowner, and the notice of violation specifies what the violation is and how they can correct, and that I believe they need to correct in 30 days. If they start a conversation with the department to say, oh, hey, well, how can I reduce the scale of my operation so that I am within the constraints of a home occupation, we'll work with people so that they understand. And then, of course, if they refuse to correct, it goes to notice of order, and then it can go to fines.
Thank you. Really quick question, because I've been out in the community for other concerns, speeding or other traffic incidents, and for some reason, sometimes when I go out there, they say, oh, the day that you came out, nothing's happening, but I promise you every other day there's cars racing down here. So what happens if the operator goes out that day and doesn't see anything, but all the other days there were occasions where, most occasions, there's those infractions that we can witness?
Sometimes an inspector will go to a site multiple times, especially if they have a lot of evidence that it's occurring, just to make sure that it's not just happening, that it's not just coincidence. But if they do go out and they don't observe a violation, then they close the request for investigation. If the person has left their name and number, they'll contact the complainant to explain what they saw. And then, of course, if, say, they weren't doing it that week and they start up again and a person complains again, then they'll go again.
So in your mind, this is the best system to deal with enforcement, or are there any other ways that we could address it?
Well, I work with the zoning code. I think sometimes the zoning code is used as a tool where it's not necessarily the best tool. I do think that the city could consider all kinds of tools that are more like license tools or more like business licenses. We tend to rely on the state for business licenses. This could be a tool. I mean, it would have to be built from the ground up, but it wouldn't be exactly a zoning tool. It's because a land use tool, we're not looking at anybody's books. We're not looking at their exactly what their business model is. That's not what we're designed for. We're looking at land use impacts, and of course the whole zoning code is based on health and safety, public health and safety. So where we may want to finer tune for certain business types, that I think there are a lot of options.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the last topic regarding to off-street parking. In addition to car sharing, homeowners may also park a car associated with their home occupation on their property. Under the current LUO, they cannot park on the street. But the FD1 would further restrict off-street parking for these commercial vehicles unless the cars are parked within a garage or carport or screened off areas. So I have a couple of questions, and I'm actually concerned about that requirement. What is considered a commercial vehicle first?
Yes, commercial vehicles are specifically or can include buses, trucks, tow trucks, truck trailers, vans, construction vehicles, limousines, and taxi cabs. So that's specifically what we're talking about when we say commercial vehicles.
Okay, so if you use your personal vehicle to pick up supplies or to drive to sites, is that a commercial vehicle?
If you're using there's a question there of if it's indistinguishable from what your personal activities would be in a car that you would do all your personal activities in, we wouldn't have a way of specifying that.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned about. So if commercial vehicles look like personal vehicles, why are we concerned if they are parked on the property?
What we're concerned about is that what we have seen includes as much as tow trucks, as big as box cars. Say you have a two-car garage plus space in the driveway, and it's all their trucks, and then all their personal vehicles are parked on the street. Those are the times when it's very problematic.
Yeah.
We've even had horse-drawn carriages where somebody insisted that they were vehicles.
Do you know why the FD1 was requiring it to be within a garage or carport? Because some people just park it right outside their garage. That would be prohibited under the FD1.
Yeah, I think that I think that could be further clarified to be talking about, vehicles, because from a licensing perspective, those commercial vehicles that are actually like industrial vehicles are given different licenses. That's what we're talking about. If you have a tow truck parked next door to you and it's within 5 feet of your property line and you always have to look at that tow truck, that feels impactful for the neighborhood.
Okay, I got it. I guess my concern is someone's personal vehicle, but they have a home occupation going on, because I guess I'm concerned about the impact for people who are actually working from home. So thank you for that. And thank you for the slew of questions today. And I hope that the members found it productive, because otherwise, it's voluminous, and I think we need to go through it one by one so that we can better understand what we're voting on. So members, with that, do you have any other questions before we vote on the amendments? The chair recommends that Bill 64, 2023 FD1 be amended to a CD1 that incorporates all of my proposed amendments in Council Communication 19, 2024, which includes 2 recommendations made by Councilmember Dos Santos Tam in Council Communication 10, 2024. It also incorporates the verbal amendment we discussed today relating to the deletion of standards for large group living in the Ag 2 zoning district, since large group living would not be permitted in that zoning district, and it makes other miscellaneous technical non-substantive amendments. We will have another opportunity for residential amendments at the March 7th Planning and Committee meeting. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, the bill is amended to CD1. The chair then recommends that Bill 64, 2023 FD1 CD1 be postponed to the next committee meeting on March 7, 2024. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. So thank you. Moving on to the last agenda item, item number 5, informational briefing, update on the allocation and use of American Rescue Plan Act fiscal recovery funds. Members, we have distributed a copy of the presentation from the Managing Director's Office entitled Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. It is also available online as Mayor's Message 20. For the administration, we have Andrew Malahoff, Executive Assistant, Office of the Managing Director.
Good morning, Chair Kia Aina and members of the Planning and Economy Committee. Andrew Malahoff from Office of Managing Director. Give me a second, let me see if I can get this. Okay. Okay. I think we can all see that. Okay, so, we're kind of nearing the end of the funds, so there's basically just 2 items to share with you folks today. One is our current FRF commitments, and then just a update. The Treasury did update some of the definitions in their final rule, so I just wanted to give some background on that. So as of January 29th, this was the breakdown of the funds awarded as well as the funds remaining. And I think an important caveat is that this excludes the commitments for the OPEB hazard pay program. So once that's factored in, effectively there will be about $5 million in tranche 2 that will remain. And again, this is just the breakdown by the categories. And those largely should remain static through the...
Mr. Malahoff, you just said tranche 2. What about tranche 1? So what will remain in tranche 1 is the funds that you guys already reprogrammed out of it?
No, so these numbers exclude the OPEB and hazard pay. So once that project has been accounted for and we finish some of the closeouts of other projects, there will be nothing left in tranche 1.
Okay, got it. That's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the confusion. And again, this is just the breakdown by the commitment categories. Kind of self-explanatory. And then, the important one, I think, was the Treasury did update the definition of obligation up to this point, and an obligation was considered to be an order placed for property and services, any contracts or subawards that would require payment. This did exclude any personnel costs. So we were unable, under the old definition, to contemplate the use of FRF funds for personnel beyond December 31st, 2024. This updated definition does allow for the use of FRF funds to fund personnel that would be necessary for any closeout reporting and anything related to compliance through December 31st, 2026. So in the event that there are perhaps some funds and it is necessary, municipalities do actually have that option to fund essential personnel through the end of the performance period. And that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, I just have a quick question on the 8.5 million you anticipated to be returned.
Yes.
What is that from tranche 2 anticipated to be returned to where? The Treasury? I'm confused.
Oh, I apologize. So as part of the calculations for the 80 million that we will be putting towards OPEB, that included approximately 10 million that will be coming back from projects that have completed and are returning funds to our FRF account. And so upon the return of those funds.
Can you move to the review results page that you have?
I'm sorry, which page?
The slide, review results.
Oh, I apologize. That is an old slide.
Okay.
My apologies about that.
Okay, no problem.
That should not have been included.
Members, do you have any questions? Councilmember Wire.
Sorry not to belabor, but I just wanted to understand. So the remaining amounts on the slide.
Sorry, let's just go back. Okay,
Yeah.
right here.
Perfect. Are the amounts that have been reprogrammed for OPEB?
So those amounts are included in what we are reprogramming. So
Okay.
that, unfortunately, there's always a little bit of lag between inputting everything into the system and then it actually being tallied. So as of January 29th, these were the totals. We have a couple of project closeouts that are going through the H&L grants and accounting systems, and that will bump up the tranche 1 amount. And then we input the OPEB project, that gets accounted to, and the net result by the end of next month is there would be about 5 million left in tranche 2.
Okay.
And it's just unfortunately one of those quirks of the accounting lags, but
Okay, so 5 million left with 80 million going to
OPEB had, yes.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And not to put you on the spot, but I'm assuming there's no update, but we're still assuming the totality of that's going to go to hazard pay?
The 80 million. Well, it would go towards prepaying OPEB, which then provides us financial capacity in FY25 to fund hazard pay.
No, perfect. Thanks for that clarification. So we don't necessarily know how much will be coming out of the general fund for hazard pay.
That I cannot answer.
Okay, thanks. Mahalo.
Members, any other questions? Vice Chair Cordero?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you very much for the update. I just wanted to go back to just the system that gets updated every month, the H&L grants accounting services. No?
2 systems. So we have H&L grants, which it handles all the project proposals, and then there's BFS's regular accounting system.
Okay, got it. So for the former, is that the one that's publicly available for us and us to share with the community as well?
So that is basically our repository for, every time we create a project, and I have shared with you folks in the past, every project has to submit a proposal that identifies the project description, its KPIs, anticipated budget, and so forth. And H&L Grants is the system that serves as the repository for that. So all of the individual project proposals certainly are public documents and we can make them available, but the system itself is not publicly accessible.
Okay. So then is what's the public site that we were looking at? Is that updated when the H&O, when the both systems are updated as well?
Generally, yes. I think you're referring to wainuoahu.org.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's generally real time, give or take maybe a day, if that, but it generally should be in real time.
Okay. And then when we do, I guess, finally move the approximately 80 million, the 30 million, then the 40 million from tranche 2, how will that be reflected on the site there?
So that would be reflected as revenue replacement, which would fall under city operations.
City operations. Okay. I see. revenue replacement for the 10 million, right? Or no? All of it?
For the 80 million, correct.
Okay.
It'd be under the treasury category of revenue replacement. And for the purposes of these categories, that would be city operations.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. Thank you for the information.
No
Thank you,
problem.
Chair.
Members, any other questions? If not, thank you so much, Mr. Malahoff.
Thank you, folks.
Clerks, we will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name. We will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. Mahalo everyone for attending and participating in today's meeting. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.